You ask, I deliver. So one of the requests that I gotten recently was regarding the IPCC report that just came out recently, and there was a lot of questions, commentary about why 2030? Why is there all this focus on things happening by 2030 and what we need to deal with and all that jazz? Why is it there? And that's a very good question, actually. And it's not where you'd think, but I'm going to start where most people think it comes from, which is from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2018 when she was publicly discussing climate change and the Green New Deal and what have you. In 2018, these were her remarks, which have lived in infamy. She said it in 2018. And you will see, of course, if you're doing math, why 2030 got popularized.
And I think that the part of it that is generational is that millennials and people and Gen Z and all these folks that come after us are looking up, and we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And like, this is the war. This is our World War II. And
so that was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's remarks regarding climate change, which made the rounds a lot of places, many times over. And of course, most of you know, watching this channel, I myself am a climate scientist, and this is one of those moments when that came up in 2018. This was one of those moments where I was like, oh, shut up. Because she does not know a damn thing about what she's actually talking about most of the time, which is very true, but that's how it got into the public lexicon primarily. But what she was referring to was a legitimate report, but the report itself that she was referring to did not say that. Did not say specifically that the world would end in 2030 if we did nothing about climate change. So, and here's a point from Axios that they actually went back and looked at that with a bunch of climate scientists. So this has already been refuted a fair bit by actual climate scientists here too. So I'm not adding too much to it except to put it all together on video for you. So here's the thing: is there is some that say, do or die kind of deadline is helpful for motivating people. I think in a lot of ways it ends up being hyperbolic, and there is actually a lot of research to support that the more apocalyptic you are in your messaging, the less likely people are to listen to you. And a good example of that is the Extinction Rebellion group in the UK, for example, pissed people off to no end with their antics, to the point where the rush hour traffic was really, really aggravated them when they accidentally stopped the subway trains from working. So, well, not accidentally. I think it was quasi-intentional to get attention, but they really annoyed people. So the fun thing, of course, here is that, yes, there's this big report from the IPCC, and I will link it for you if you would like to go read it in the description. This was put out in October 2018 by the IPCC, and separate and apart from the big assessment reports that come out every few years. They do these in little interim reports like this, which they tend to call special reports. And this is the summary for policymakers for it. Of course, you can get into all the big deals and what have you, but most of what we need to talk about with some of this, and I'll go back to the Axios article in a bit, most of what we need to talk about with this is right here in the summary for policymakers. And so wanted to bring that up in here because this is where you tend to find a lot of the things about the idea of 2030. It's not so much 2030 that climate scientists are concerned about, but there is a lot of reporting and research and work being done that suggests it would be a good idea for the collective society at large to do enough to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases and what have you, such that warming of the planet is kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer for the global average temperature. I'm not talking about individual location. Global average temperature kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than it was during pre-industrial times. It is reasoned that once it goes over 1.5 degrees Celsius, the impacts of a changing climate will be much more detrimental. Not end of the world, but there would be more suffering involved of people, is what the thought is. There would be more difficulties in adaptation involved, and more adaptation measures would be necessary as opposed to mitigation measures. And that's two things to keep in mind. There's two aspects. These get confused, but there's two aspects to keep in mind with the sort of policy kind of approaches with this. One is the mitigation, which is what do you do to reduce fossil fuels or greenhouse gases or pollution or anything like that. Those are specific policies about that, and they can be anything from local to national. Is my preference. I'm not a big fan of international stuff because I prefer the sovereignty of nations, but at the same time, that's one way to do it. The other kind of policy is adaptation policy, which is where you get into not just, we're not going to just reduce climate change. We're not going to just reduce emissions, rather, but we're going to focus on policies that, allow our people to adapt to how things are going to change based upon the information of their projections. The research-wise, I tend to work more on the adaptation side than the mitigation side, and not policy-wise. I just, they point out, hey, this is how we think the climate's going to change. That's pretty much it. But that's the kind of things that we're talking about with policies in particular. But the idea is, with respect to 2030, the 2030 notion and the idea of 1.5 degrees Celsius increase is that adaptation becomes much more difficult, and much more adaptation is required with respect to a changing climate when you have a 1.5 degrees C or more warming from pre-industrial levels. That's the idea, generally. It does not say the world's going to end. It's just more so that it would be a lot harder. The report itself did not say that. So this is the nice thing about the summary for policymakers, I will admit, is that there is a lot of things up front like this. Like, these are the key points from the report, and you can go in and dive in and figure out, go see figures and things like that if you really want to go learn more. But these are the key things, and that's what I just want to point to with this. I encourage you, if you have the time, go dig in there and read it, and then, if you have questions, come back and talk to me. So, at the time, so this is going back to October 2018, so this is about 3 years ago now, human activities are estimated to have caused approximately 1 degree Celsius of global warming above pre-industrial levels, with a likely range of 8.8 degrees Celsius to 1.2 degrees Celsius. Global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2052 if it continues to increase at the current rate. So this is where, right here, one of the big things is where 2030 comes from. And I think down here, they down here in the thing here, you can see they have projected climate change potential impacts, associated risks. That's where they get into the things that they think are the risks if you go over 1.5 degrees Celsius in the global 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in the global average temperature. Again, whenever you see numbers like this in IPCC reports, often they are referring to the global average temperature. They are not referring to the temperature exactly where you are. That change over time has likely been different, and whatever the global average temperature is an average of everywhere, all the different points on the globe. So bear that one in mind. Reflecting the long-term warming warming is, so a lot of these bold ones are sort of key things, and you see like A.1.1 or A.1.2, things like that. Those are subtext to the previous one. Warming from anthropogenic and pre-industrial period to present will persist for centuries to millennia and will continue to cause further long-term changes in the climate system, such as sea level rise with associated impacts. But these emissions alone are unlikely to cause a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. Medium confidence in that. Let's see. Climate-related risks for natural and human systems are higher for global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius than at present, but lower than at 2 degrees Celsius. These risks depend upon the magnitude and rate of warming, geographic location, levels of development, vulnerability, and on the choices and implementation of adaptation mitigation options. So, and I apologize, I'm having some sound issues again with my microphone, so we're going to try and sort that out at some time in the near future. But here's the fun thing. Here's the fun thing with some of this is that this is kind of, they're getting at a little bit what I was trying to say before, that they're not as concerned about, you know, it's the idea is that as the anomaly gets warmer, there's more warming from pre-industrial levels. The idea then is that the impacts become worse. So that's the thing to bear in mind of what they're thinking about, and the idea that they're thinking that this could happen by the time 2030 rolls around. What they're more concerned about, though, is, you know, what happens not just at 2030, but after 2030. In here, let's see. Yeah. So this is a good graphic, actually, related to that. So cumulative emissions of CO2 and future non-CO2 radii forcing determine the probability of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So one of the things they're saying with this report is, actually, to put a point on it, is that they think that it will be next to impossible to limit that warming, limit the increase in global average temperatures to be less than 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Goddamn microphone. By the end of the century, they're not necessarily worried about, you know, 1.5 degrees Celsius and suddenly the world stops at 2030. No, that's not the thing, because the impacts there will take a decent amount of time involved. So that's, again, the thing there. I'm just thinking, let's see. Yeah, climate models project robust differences in regional climate characteristics between present day and global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius and between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. These differences will include increases in mean temperature in most land and ocean regions, hot extremes in the most inhabited regions, heavy precipitation in several regions, and the probability of drought and precipitation deficits in some regions. So this is the section that you need to focus on if you're thinking about if you're thinking about it from the standpoint you're hearing the hyperbolic of extremes are going to cause all sorts of problems. And yes, it's true, the extremes have increased. So this is, again, where some of that hyperbolic language comes from, with the idea there of there's going to be increases in the frequency of extremes, and that's a legit thing under climate changes. The climate changes, and we've known that from past climates, and we can observe these things. But that's where this is coming from. But you notice that none of this says that the world is going to end. None of this has said that. And that's where the thing is, Ocasio-Cortez is very wrong. There is nothing in this report that actually says that. But it is a potent thing here. And again, I'm not going to go through all of this because, as I mentioned with the last IPCC video that I did, the IPCC reports are freakishly long. Even the summaries for policymakers are very dang long. So it's a point to make sure in here. And this is the section B here is where they're actually talking about climate-related risks. And I think it's, section C here. In model pathways with no or limited overshoot of 1.5 degrees Celsius, global net anthropogenic CO2 emissions declined by about 45% from 2010 levels by 2030, 40 to 60 interquartile range, reaching net zero around 2050. For limiting global warming below 2C, CO2 emissions are projected to decline by 25% by 2030 in most pathways, 10 to 30% interquartile range, and reach net zero around 2070. Non-CO2 emissions in pathways that limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius show deep reductions that are similar to those pathways limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius. And this is all about limiting the amount of warming. It is not about saying the world's going to end at this particular point. That said, of course, I am still a fan of doing something policy-wise. I'm not going to recommend exactly what, because that is not my purview. But doing something is certainly better than doing nothing, from what I understand and what I put forward there. But this is what I wanted to show you all, just to make sure that you understand where this is coming from. And that's why the thing is 1.5 degrees Celsius is what is recommended to limit things to, and that's why they say 2030 in here. Is they believe that to achieve that, it must decrease the amount of CO2 emissions globally by 45% of what it was in 2010, which I don't know off the top of my head what exactly that number is. So that's the thing there, is we'll think about that. But that's where that comes from. And if you'd like a shorter version of it debunking AOC's comment about the end of the world, then this Axios article actually does a half decent job with that. Interviews a bunch of different scientists in here. Yeah, so while there are only 12 years left till 2030 when the IPCC report came out, the reality is that we have a diverse array of choices before us in terms of how to make emissions cuts and how significant and costly they are, top climate scientists told Axios. Their comments were about the framing of the rigid 12-year timetable in general, not specifically in reaction to Ocasio-Cortez's remarks. So yes, they are not actually reacting specifically to Ocasio-Cortez, but no bones about it. She actually prompted this in here. She is right that a lot of the... So according to a lot of climate scientists, she's right that a lot of the decisions we made will affect what happens with the climate in the future. She is not right that doing nothing... She's not right that the decisions we make today, if they aren't enough, will mean the end of the world. Katherine Hayhoe, she was at Texas Tech at the time, told Axios that the idea that there is only a finite amount of time to fix climate change is the wrong way to look at the problem. She summed up the IPCC's 1.5 degree report this way: every action matters, every bit of warming matters, every year matters, and every choice matters. And that's a fair thing, I think. Let's see. Yeah. All the time-limited frames are bullshit. This is Gavin Schmidt, who is actually at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York. Nothing special happens when the carbon budget runs out or we pass whatever temperature target you care about. Instead, the cost of emissions steadily rise. The IPCC report, for example, found the impacts worsen considerably beyond 1.5 degrees warming. That's what I mean by this. That's what I was talking about when I was flipping through some of those things, is it is not about the world's going to end. It's about when you get to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which the earliest that's possible is 2030, then you could get to the point where impacts start getting bad. That's the point that they're trying to make with this. It is not... It is not important here. I disagree very strongly with Axios in this. Even if hard deadlines are scientifically flawed, they can be effective when it comes to activism. The 12-year time frame in particular has been widely adopted by proponents of climate action. Yes, I understand that you all want activism. I'm not going to support activism that's not based on the truth. And so you've made a hyperbolic deadline that's based upon your own little twisted vision here, instead of actually being based on science. No, you're lying to people if you do that. Stop. Anyway, that's it. I thought you'd appreciate this helpful little video about the where the hell that 2030 thing comes from. It's not really from Ocasio-Cortez, but she did popularize it and get it into the lexicon somewhat by her choice of words in 2018. But in reality, it's not an end of the world thing. It's pretty much the earliest, according to that prior report, it's pretty much the earliest that they thought that 1.5 degrees Celsius, the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that they're worried about for there being really bad impacts would come to pass. Oh, whoop! How did that happen? And come to think of it, I wanted to point out one thing. So you'll see these in a lot of reports, so you can track it yourself if you're going back and looking at it. So they always start with the observed here. So human activities are estimated to cause approximate 1 degree Celsius of global warming above pre-industrial levels, with a likely range of 1.8 to 1.2 Celsius. Global warming is likely to reach 1.5 Celsius between 2030 and 2052 if it continues to increase at the current rate. So you all remember the report that just came out recently, the 2021 report. They had a very similar thing at the top line. It wasn't quite right at the first thing here, but it certainly is in here. So the likely range of total human-caused global temperature increase from 1850 to 1990 to 2010 to 2019 is 0.8 Celsius to 1.3 Celsius, with a best estimate of 1.07 Celsius. So in other words, still within the range of error from the last one in 2018. That's not, I wouldn't take that I wouldn't dismiss that. to be honest, because it's 3 years difference, and often we don't think of climate with respect to 3 years, to be honest. So this would be about the same number. I would be more concerned with what happens in the next 10 years or so, rather than the 3 years difference between now and 2018. So I wouldn't go crazy with this, but it's consistent. Is a thing I will point out, is they've been consistent, and it is increasing ever so slightly, at least in their best estimate. Okay, that's it. All I wanted to mention with this, again, apologies for the sound issues. If you like the video, share the video, comment on the video, like the video, of course, click that like button, slap that like button if you'd like. Either that or put it in a chemical beaker and do all sorts of things with the like button that way. Comment below your thoughts also, and let me know if there's anything else you want me to get into from the climate side of things. I'm happy to do that and break it down for you. Until next time, of course, you can also find me on sciworthy.locals.com, sciworthy.locals.com. Become a supporter there, and you can connect with myself and other scientists, even more so than on YouTube. Anyway, that's it for now. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, my friends.